Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for Beginning with the End in Mind, our workshop on backward design. I'm Jenny Douglas, and this is Amy Kuhn. So we'll introduce ourselves just briefly and have you introduce yourselves because you are representing a lot of departments in some different colleges, so we want to make sure you know each other a little bit before we get going. And then we're really planning to have you do a lot of work this morning to work on a course or something that you have in mind you'd like to work on designing. So I've been at WVU since 2009. My background is I have an English PhD, so I'm really a repressed literature major doing something else now. So I started off being a faculty member at Trinity College in Illinois and then came here to do graduate student professional development. So I've been in the Office of Graduate Education and Life doing professional development programs for graduate students across different areas of the university to help them either become faculty members or think about other skills that they might want to develop, like communication or leadership, to move forward. And as of this summer, Amy and I are both now in a brand new unit called Teaching and Learning Commons, which is basically like a teaching learning center model, and we'll talk about that a little more at the end. And so we're continuing the work with graduate students, but we're also going to be adding a lot of new programming for faculty. So that's where we are, and our physical offices are in this building now, so congratulations on finding it. But we also do travel around a lot to different parts of campus, so this is our home base, but we're around different sides of campus quite a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. We're looking forward to working with you this morning and continuing on from there. Well, what we cover today will definitely give you ideas of how to keep your students engaged. It will set a foundation for flipped classroom. But flipped classroom really will be a different workshop. So one of our things at the end is what else do we need to do? So we already have one item for our agenda to do a flipped classroom. And we would model it the same way that you walk out with a product that you're pretty much ready to use. So, okay. We'll just sit it here so I'm not in your way. When you teach, okay, there are obviously many, many things that you have to take into consideration, but there are three major components. All right, so does anybody want to guess what they are? Three major things that you have to think about.
I think that
Go ahead.
The
goal? Okay. So we'll write goal over here. And what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say the main concept for the day.
Okay.
Focus.
The focus, the goal, the outcome. Okay.
objective.
The objective. Yeah. A lot of different words for that. Goals, objectives, outcomes.
The
Okay.
type of presentation or the activities.
Okay. Yep. So you have your activities. I'll turn this. Hang on. We need a whiteboard in here. Activities. Okay.
We do a little check.
The assessment.
Your assessment. Okay, good. And we'll just say outcomes up here. Okay, so these are your three main pieces. What do you want your students to learn? Okay. How are you going to know if they learned it? And then how are you going to help them to get there? So those are your three main pieces. Now the reason that they call this backwards design, or beginning with the end in mind, is a lot of times when people think, okay, I'm going to teach this, what am I going to do? They think, what am I going to do? Okay, they do that first. And sometimes what happens is they put all these different activities together, but they don't really synchronize, and they don't help the students to get here, the learners to really figure out what they're supposed to be learning. Okay? And then sometimes they skip this. They don't think of really good ways to assess and figure out, are they getting there? Are they picking up what we really need them to learn? So that's why backwards design, you start with what, okay? What do I want my learners to know, to be able to do? Then this piece, how are you going to know? And how are you going to help them to learn it? So today you're actually going to work on these 3 pieces and put them together, okay? So, any questions about those 3 basic pieces? Alrighty, it's time for you to work now.
So we're going to start with the first stage that Amy mentioned, which is, what do you want your students to learn or to be able to do at the end? And there's levels of this: at the end of the course, at the end of this unit, at the end of this lesson. So as we go through the exercises, pick for yourself a target. What do you want to work on today specifically? So one of the main things ways of trying to figure out what you want your students to learn is to work through learning outcomes, which I'm sure is a familiar term to folks. So let's just define learning outcomes, and then we'll look at some ways of writing them in an effective way that will help you with this process. So how would you define what a learning outcome is?
What the student should be able to do as a result of the instruction.
Right, what they should be able to do.
Not perform.
What do learning outcomes usually look like when you see them written out?
At the end of this unit, you should be able to.
Yeah, they often start with that. Students should be able to, and then
Bullet points.
yes, a description, exactly. So one of the challenges with learning outcomes is a lot of us start with a very limited vocabulary in terms of articulating what it is that we want students to do. And so we brought some tools to try to help diversify our thinking process for learning outcomes. We're going to start to pass these around. So one of the handouts that you're seeing looks like a table with 2 sides, and this is a different one. And the other one is sort of like a double-sided chart. Is anyone familiar with the idea of Bloom's taxonomy? Could you describe what is Bloom's taxonomy?
It's goals, learning goals that students have the levels. So they start with very basic concepts and they go increasing in complexity until they are really proficient. And
Yeah.
those are, I think, verbs that can define those levels, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. So the second page of the table handout has these colorful looking triangles, pyramids on the bottom. And it's basically what Wagner just said, that the idea behind Bloom's taxonomy is that there are different levels of thinking skills or tasks that we might want students to do, beginning on the bottom with the very foundational, just remembering, just knowledge base, and then working upwards through deeper comprehension, understanding, applying material to new situations, being able to analyze more complex problems, and then eventually at the top levels, creating, evaluating, synthesizing. Students are doing more complex tasks, able to create higher level products. Those are your papers and projects, and where they really have to take that knowledge and extend it and own it and make it their own. So that's helpful insofar as that in thinking about learning outcomes, it gives you a tool to think at what levels do I want the students to be able to work with this content through the course or through the unit. And this helps to maybe generate learning outcomes that are more reflective of what you really want them to do. So I know a lot of us, including me, will start off with understand, 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 be familiar with, appreciate. Those are great starting points, but hard to know if the students can do that. So what we're giving you here are some tools. Both of these sheets go through the levels of bloom. Both of them have a lot of verbs associated with every level of bloom, so that you can think about what level you want the students to function, be able to do, or to learn by the end of that stage that you're at. So what we'd like you to do is use these as a prop, as they're helpful. Think about what you brought today, your course, lesson, object, and we'd like you to write or revise learning outcomes for that, and use these as they're helpful to think about where you really want the students to end up. So we're going to give you some working time to work on that individually, and then we'll come back together and ask you what you've come up with and try to help each other figure out where you want to be. So did you find that you were identifying verbs from different places on the chart as you were looking at some of your different tasks in the course, what you wanted the students to do? Good. Would someone be willing to share what you're working on and give us an example of an outcome that you came up with for this?
This is a skills lab that is not in existence now that we're creating. And one of them was utilize the medical literature to support drug therapy decisions. So this is a course that will be in small groups, and it's very skills and application based.
So they're utilizing knowledge they've gotten a base from other places and trying to applying it.
Drug information resources,
Okay.
go out to the literature, go out to the web, and then
Do
use that to
research.
support their decision.
That's great. Could we have another example just to get a little variety going? Sure.
My course really just has a lot of content. It's about plants as food and wellness. So it's got pharmacy connections in it, but so the students need to understand what's on their plate in front of them, basically. How does that relate to the plant as it was growing in the ground, and where foods come from? So one of the things I like them to think about is if we didn't have our international economy. You know, they just have to learn a lot of plants. Some foods that you're familiar with and some they aren't. But like if you were a person in X or Y country before we had all this international, you know, what would you have for that meal? You know, what would be available for you as a vegetable and a fruit, and you know, and so that's their activity, is to kind of compose their diet, a diet. That's just one question.
I'd like them to have your class before they have this.
Yeah, I don't actually, maybe I should have you come and do, I don't do a whole lot of nutrition because I'm very
That's not your
botanically
expertise.
oriented. Right, yeah, and so I talk more about where the plants are from and what kind of classificatory groupings they're in, and that, you know, a lot of things are called nuts, but they aren't true nuts, you know, and not to mention that I tell my students half of them are nuts.
Yeah.
They're crazy.
Yeah, that was good. I heard framework, trying to give them a framework, scaffolding, reference point, way to organize that information.
There's no lab for this class, so it's just really frustrating for me because I don't like just talking at the students, and this is why I was into the flipped classroom, because it's a readable textbook. They're honor students. they're gonna go home and read the textbook when I tell them to read it. And they'll come into class and I'm not gonna just regurgitate it to them. So, you know, we want to talk about what they gleaned from it. But that's maybe a different class too, so that's okay.
Yeah, but you're getting there because, right, having them look at the basic content out of class and then coming in and doing application,
Well, things for them to do.
application
It's the hard part, you know, that's gonna be
activities.
interesting to the honors students.
Right. So where we are with the outcomes is if you want them to be able to develop a diet based on local plants from that area, then that's a definite higher level using that information.
I actually, one time, this is a new course, it's not formally approved, but I've taught it a couple times. I got a bag of the 7-bean soup, or whatever it was. It was more, it had like 12 or 13 kinds of beans in it. And I gave them each a scoop and had them take it home and sort out how many different kinds of beans did they find in there. They didn't have to know the names of them, but they just, how many different beans are in this soup? And I thought for sure that I would get lots of complaints about that activity because it's like, well, what's the point or whatever. And I even had my daughter help me do it at home because, you know, it's something a 3-year-old can do. But interestingly enough, they were right there. And then we came in the next day and we lined all the little different, they each had their piece of paper with all their little beans on it. And I think it actually turned out to be a pretty good activity. I don't know.
And so, Kimberly, you're teaching nutrition?
No, the course is called Lifestyle and Weight Management.
Okay.
The goal of the course is to be able to pass a national certification test to
Okay.
either become a health coach, a certified health coach, or to become a certified personal trainer, and to be able to help, especially those who are obese, make some lifestyle changes so that they are healthier. So I approached this task differently and just looking at the syllabus, and I checked to see if the verbiage was included. But to be successful in the class, you have to have an understanding of exercise physiology, some understanding of nutrition, some understanding of psychology, and some understanding of communication. So those are I have to get all of that in there, and then they have to be able to apply it and pass that test, but also it's that one-on-one interaction. Like if they're going to go out and have a career in this, it's not a career for everybody. So they kind of get weeded out a little bit and may change their mind on whether or not that's something they want to do. So that's kind of where I thought hers would tie in.
Yeah.
They had that piece of information and thought about, well, what's on my plate?
So how do they take this test? Is it an online test? Is it an in-person, like, practical test, or is it it's a paper test, multiple choice, or
Well, there
essay?
are multiple nationally accredited exams that you can choose to sit for, different agencies. The one that this one's designed by is the American Council on Exercise, so that's the one that I'm helping them prep for. But there are other ones, and some of them have like the practical component, some of them are just the written online testing, so they can choose which one they want to take after they complete the class. But the one with the American Council on Exercise, it's an online one. And it's kind of set up so that they don't have the practical, but they have the case study component built into it.
So it sounds like we have a lot of different endpoints for these different courses, which is good. And so just to recap as we move on to the next stage, we're starting with where we want the students to be at the end, what we really want them to have at the end of this experience in terms of knowledge and skills. And then we'll be working backwards from the end point towards our assessments and activities. So I'm going to come back to Amy for the next stage.
Okay. We're going to talk about classroom assessments. And so we're going to do this in 2 phases. First is you're going to work in groups to talk about what are the different kinds of assessments that you use. And hopefully you might pick up on some that you don't use and somebody else does. And then what we're going to do is have you sit down and think about what are different kinds of assessments that you can use, okay, to help you get your students to the outcomes, to the goals and the objectives. So what we have here, I figured there are 8 people, so if we can work like this would be a group up here. And if you think it's too crowded here, if anybody wants to come over here, but I thought maybe this group right here, and we have markers. If you want to take a few minutes and brainstorm with each other about different kinds of assessments that you have either used, that someone has used when you've gone to a workshop or taken a class, or anything that you've heard about, pick a color.
I like green.
Okay. Pick a color. All right.
So any assessments or good assessments?
So we're
Well, which kind of,
Probably we want to learn about good ones, but it's good to learn about ones that aren't, so we don't repeat.
types of assessments.
The reason I ask
Do
that is
you
we tend
use
to
the
use
EQ
only multiple choice
assessment tools?
exam questions.
Uh-huh.
Content.
Oh,
To set up the exams and
But I
we've
do
done
think
it
there is a
for each
place where it
And
says
which kind of
There,
test?
is, but there are a lot of other ways that you might be able to.
choice, true, false type test.
So,
Is part of the
what we're going to do, I'm looking for similarities and differences so that we can learn from each other. So I'm trying to look at these lists here and see peer reviews is on both, multiple choice is on both, pre-class test. So you were talking about that, right, Wagner? Does anybody here do pre-class testing?
do quizzes on readings.
Okay. Is it for a grade or, okay, and how do you do it?
Well, I teach a graduate course that goes very deep into concepts and builds on what they already know. So to make sure that they read every chapter, I give one chapter of that book per class, and I cover the whole book in one semester. So it's a very fast pace, but builds on concept. So I need to make sure that they read the chapter before class or after I teach, so that they are always on check. So they like that. Actually, they complain in the beginning, but then they realize that they would not be keeping up with the course if they don't have this pre-class test. So they know every class. They come and they have 15 minutes to answer maybe three quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
They have to write down. It's not multiple choice, so they have to write down, and so that they keep up with the pace.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. In here, we were talking about simulations and case studies. So do you want to elaborate? This group want to share a little bit about those?
Well, in terms of simulations, there are some classes where simulations are very appropriate, and there are different ways to do that. And one of the classes that we cover in our area is to make decisions to modify, redesign, or improve a system. So by simulating the system or giving a system for the student and have the student to work and making decisions about that system, we can assess if they are actually learning the content that we're covering. So we can use the simulation both to help them get there, and we can use the simulation to assess them in the end. And the simulation can be used, a small simulation in 1 or 2 classes or a few classes, but there are courses where we can use the simulation throughout the semester. So we're going to build their skills throughout the semester, and we can assess them on an ongoing basis.
Now, is something that they're doing in health sciences team-based learning? Is that a big, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Buzzword now in pharmacy education. We have a couple of courses that are using it, where basically the students have some sort of pre-reading, pre-work they have to do. They go into class, they have to take an individual quiz or assessment. Then they're in teams of maybe 5 or 6 students, and then they take the same assessment as a team. So they talk through the questions, and then the team submits the answers. And usually the team does better than the students did individually. And both of those count towards their grade. So how they do individually and how they do as a team. then there's some sort of learning activity based on what they came in knowing. So in pharmacy, it's usually some sort of case study, so they then have to go through the case study, and then as a group they discuss it. And some will use, like there may be a question given at a certain point and the team has to discuss what their answer is, and then everybody kind of holds up A, B, C, D, whatever their choice is at the same time, and an instructor can kind of use that to stimulate discussion. Why did you guys decide to choose A? And then debate with why the other team choose B. So really lecturing being removed. And we had a speaker come in this week that talked about team-based learning. Sometimes at the very end there might be a little bit of lecture where you kind of try to bring all the pieces back together at the end of the session, but really most of the class time devoted to some sort of activity that they do to apply what they read.
Okay.
So we're going to try it in some more classes.
Okay, good. So team-based learning, and then when we were listening to all of you talk about these, a lot of these are assessments, but you're also doing them as activities in your classes, correct?
Just thinking, yeah.
Yeah. So, good. Double dipping. That's good. So they can serve two purposes. The other thing that I've noticed here as you're talking is you're hitting the main kinds of assessment that there are. Does anybody know like the educational words for your different kinds of assessments?
Summative, formative.
Yes. Okay. I'll write those down here. So you have formative, and you have summative. And then if we can go with a third category, which this team hit on, and I think you did too, is your self-reflection, self-assessment. So you can have your students do that. You can also do that yourself. Reflect as the teacher. So these are your three main kinds of assessments. And I think we hit them all in here today. So just to make sure that we all understand, what is the difference? What's formative?
Formation of knowledge, so concepts, and so we are assessing how much or what they learned.
Just the facts, or?
Formative, the way that it's defined in education world is formative is ongoing. So if you want to know where they are, okay? Or am I ready to go to the next thing that I'm ready to teach? Or do I need to backtrack? Do I need to reteach, cover anything else? So it's more of an ongoing. A lot of times there's not a grade assigned to a formative. So that's where I think that we're getting a lot of the activities in here. So there are assessments where you're getting the knowledge. How are they doing? Do I need to go back and cover anything? But it might not be a real formal, there's a grade, you know, this is a high stakes, more of a high stakes. Okay. Summative is more at the end, like at the end of the course, at the end of a unit, at the end of some big topic that you want to know, okay, did they get it or not? That's where it's usually your more high stakes, if you will, that phrase. Tests, it's a quiz, it's a project, it's something that has point value assigned to it. And then the third piece is the self-reflection or the self-assessment, to get them to think, you know, how are they doing? What can they do better? What can they do differently? Where are they? What are they thinking? So those are your three basic kinds of assessment. And when you look at your list that you've created, your assessments on there could fall anywhere. It just depends on how you're going to implement them in the classroom. So there's not a defined category. Usually they say tests and quizzes are summative, but you use a pretest, there's no point value assigned to it, so that's more of a formative. You want to see their base knowledge and where do I need to start. Okay, so it just depends. You as the educators, you get to decide how you're going to use your different kinds of assessment.
This might be worth a whole nother course too, because I'm a little bit leery of the teamwork or group work, just how, I mean, I think it's a great way, like we were working here in teams, but when it goes to the point of trying to grade people and figure out what they did, and I know there's all sorts of, like you can say how much did each person contribute or participate, and they can peer review or something, but I know sometimes as students there's a bit of a backlash because some students are really don't like group work, and
The overachievers don't like the slackers.
Yeah.
well, yeah, I think it's a lot of times the stronger students because they feel like that they're just pulling along the rest of the team, and that they don't gain much from the experience. And I mean, yeah, we need to reach out to everybody in the classroom, but I think it's a difficult situation. And so for that reason, I haven't done a lot of formal group or teamwork beyond the classic, think, pair, share kind of thing in the classroom.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
That's interesting because we were discussing before, and for the project management, that is actually something that I purposefully want to happen, because in real life, we will be working.
It's true.
I think all of us have worked in teams where you're there and, oh my God, I should have been done with this a long time, but we still have to finish that. And so we have to simulate this and prepare them for those situations. So I purposefully choose the teams based on what I ask some information from them prior to the course or the first day, and then I set up the teams in a way to generate conflict. And one of my assessments is discuss potential conflict issues that might occur, and then I ask the feedback, and that's how I try to assess them. Because one thing is to, okay, I'm aware of all these things, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to actually handle that. And I've seen in real life many really great folks having problems because of the inability to deal with these conflicts. So, of course, this is for this context. It's not going to work for every course or every context.
Good point.
It's also a practical application of real life and learning how to learn from the situations that they have. I think that should be a piece of what they do.
Oh, I think that's good because a lot of times students will say, why am I learning this? How's this going to help me? But there's a great example.
And in the end, you'll actually get to discuss that and see, well, does that make sense? All these things that we discussed, and how did you guys handle it? And then discuss in different groups. They start, oh, okay, I could have done this, or I could have done that differently, or I handled this properly.
So do they have to stay together for the whole time frame of the course, or do you have like different groups throughout? So I think one group all semester, they may not like
I
that.
have different projects. I have one that is a long term, that is a big final project that they will discuss in the end. But then I have several small little projects, and those will shift around.
Yeah,
And the big one is the one that I actually really select very carefully and try to create
conflict.
Well, that's a case
Like
where your
that.
outcome is not a product, but the process, it seems to me that you're, I mean.
They're actually both, because they will be assessed on the project, but then there is also the behavioral side of it.
Yeah.
So they're both.
Yeah, I think sometimes in our, especially in biology, we tend to ask them, for example, team work to produce a single presentation, for example.
Right.
And then this is not a real life situation, right? How many times do we put together the same presentation to, have to meet? So sometimes I think it creates a little bit of, one person does, the other ones just come along, right? So I think the way that you tackle the teamwork and for what you need, that activity should be an important part.
There are so many different ways to assess your students. I think it's good to see that you're doing a lot of formative, so that's ongoing instead of getting to like a milestone and then going, oh, you know, we got problems. So that's really good. Assessment is a huge topic, and like you said, even just team-based learning could be a separate workshop. Assessments itself could be a separate workshop. There's just so much to it, but I think you have a good foundation here. Now, you asked when you started writing these, are we doing activities or assessments? Because they kind of overlap, so.
Yeah.
You could not separate them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think
So-
our final stage, the activity stage, has some significant overlap going on already based on what you've said, but just to take it back out to our model, so we started with the really big picture of the outcomes where you want the students to end up, and then in thinking about assessments, that's how you know where they are along the way, and also with the bigger projects or tests, you know, what can they demonstrate to you that they have learned. So the last stage is really building off of that again to come down to the day-to-day activities. How do I really run my class in such a way that supports where we're going with these assessments and supports where I want them to be at the end of the class? So you've already started doing that because we've seen overlap with the activities and especially the lower stakes assessments.
It's how to challenge the good students, the students that are prepared, without alienating the students that are not there yet. It's a really big challenge.
There's one thing that I found useful this year is I looked at their course prerequisites, and I went and spoke to those faculty and got part of their slide decks, and I posted those to the students this semester and said, look, this material should be reviewed for you. Here's it directly from your former professor. If it's not reviewed, you need to spend time, you know, catching up a little bit. And so it was clear that it was review material and that they had it before. And I think it made it maybe a little less daunting to sort of catch up.
One thing that I've done and that kind of worked a little bit is to give them a challenging problem every so often, and invariably the good students will finish those problems very fast. And then instead of being there just slacking that I don't allow these things in my class anyways, I actually have them, I walk around, and then when I see somebody finishing, I pair that person up with somebody that I have identified as struggling. So the person that has finished now is not going to be just like, but the challenge for that person is going to be to help somebody that's not there yet. So in a way, that is a little bit of a challenge for that person, so he or she will not be so bored. And there will be a help for the person that is struggling, because he or she will be hearing how to solve that problem from a different person other than me. So I try to model the way that I would think the problem, but again, there are several different ways to do that, and not every student will identify with my way to solve it. So by doing that, I think it helps a little bit, but I'm still eager to learn about the different techniques to achieve the same goal.
And that sounds like another possible topic is working with students' background knowledge when you realize, you know, like, as in a lot of classes, there's a spectrum going on, and trying to figure out how to work with that.
To that, as we expand the education for more and more folks and becomes more and more democratic, we're going to have more and more of that challenge, I believe. I could see that over the years. I'm not teaching for that many years, but I've seen some difference in the composition of the classes. Some good and some perhaps not so good.
I think you've identified some possible means to work with that. One, figuring out, first of all, using those background checks to see what the students may or may not be coming in with, working with other faculty. So in so much as you have opportunities to work across curriculum, which sounds like the pharmacy department's doing right now, to see what's working in different classes that the students may have access to from previous material, and working with tutoring centers on campus where that's possible if there's external resources, and maybe providing things through your eCampus site or accessing tutorials from other places that might be necessary. But these are all techniques. Those are still big challenges. So as we're wrapping up what we're trying to do today, I know we've identified a lot of questions that all of you have, but we want to help you think about going forward from here. So this is just a start of a process for you. So as we try to pull it together here, did you make any changes today to your learning outcomes or your concepts of what you wanted that course to look like?
I'm dealing with a new course, so I would say I just have ideas for what we can move forward with.
Yeah, I think I have a broader list of things to try to involve, and things that I might be able to implement. It might, again, be nice to have, like, one of the things we talked about was the challenge of discussions and discussion groups, and again, that would be a whole nother course. How do you effectively manage a discussion? This didn't come up because we were talking about other things, but I am interested in doing some of the peer group work. When I teach my lab class, I mean, I very much encourage the students to pair up on their own and work in groups, and I'm there listening and watching them, and it's, very clear that they're doing an activity, and there's no doubt that, 2 or 3 heads are better than one on something, and they tend to discover that on their own and go in groups, but sometimes if they just do a group with their friend, they're kind of all alike, and they don't get the benefit of having a diverse group where there's different skills and attitudes. And so, do you assign groups intentionally based on an assessment of their skills and attitudes? Do you just randomly put people in groups? Do you let them self-select their groups? Our concern with discussion is the students not feeling that they're being singled out or picked on. And the other thing is that you don't have one talkative person like me, maybe, who's like, always speaking up and saying something, and other people just sitting there.
Sometimes there's language barriers or other barriers that the students prefer not to have disclosed, and that's something to consider too.
Did you find this overall model a helpful way to think about designing a course? What do you think are the possible benefits of working with this kind of backward design model? What could it help you to do?
Well, I do think that it helps frame what you want from that class, what you want the students to learn, and it gets you a working frame very, very nice to think about your course.
I think it helps you to actually achieve the purpose of the course, right? Because otherwise we just, we're assessing a couple of things here, or doing some activities, but they may or may not be entirely related to where we want to be in the end. So I think that helps, again, the alignment.
One of the things I plan to do, I've talked with them, is to do adding in that pre-assessment with each of the units, since there's so many different types of material, which will be a challenge. But the other thing is I'm going to go back and look at all of the activities and make sure that it's the best way to meet that outcome. So I'm going to read that outcome and then go back and double check. See if there's anything I can tweak, drop out, and add new things.
Those are really good takeaways in terms of, I think you've identified some of the benefits of this particular model and trying to think through the end game for a course, and then how all of the pieces then contribute to the end game. And I think it helps us, when we're in the midst of teaching, it tends to be the day-to-day, what am I going to do for class today? And trying to think up to that the level of where we would like the students to be at the end. So if that's useful for you and you can take something back from that as a way of orienting some of your thinking, that's great. And it sounds like we have a lot of possible topics to build from here, which is excellent because like all of our fields, there's endless expansion of things to discuss and to work on together. So I think you suggested some topics. Let me reiterate some of the things that I've heard as follow-ups, because we did want to get ideas for things you would be interested in working with in the future. So we heard flipped classroom quite early, what that means, how to implement something of that size. I heard large classes come up a couple of times, working in particular with those bigger classes and the special situations that come up when you have a lot of students in the room. There were some technology questions that came out. I think I heard clickers from both sides of the room at different points and what methods are useful in implementing technology, or what forms of technology to bring into a classroom. Group work, teamwork, we just heard quite a bit about, and implementing discussions, and potentially working with students with very different levels of background knowledge. Do you want to add anything to that list? Those are some of the things I picked up.
One thing I haven't had to deal with a lot, and it's very specialized, but it is the dealing with students with disabilities as we're becoming more inclusive. I know I've had a faculty member who had a hearing impaired person. In my class, I had someone with a speech impediment, and we're trying to do discussion, and as a faculty, you're tempted to don't call them, it's hard for that person to talk, and so just issues of maybe managing different sorts of disability in the classroom, and the resources that are available to help you with that.
That would be a great thing.
Yep, that's excellent.
Diversity, maybe,
I mean, the visually impaired, I'm just like, I don't think someone who's visually impaired could take a couple of my classes. I mean,
good ideas.
I would also see maybe a different forum, but online courses, because it's been a boom of online courses, but how are they being thought of, And what I'm doing is actually taking some Coursera courses. So that I learn how they are doing and what works, what doesn't work. But it might not be the most effective way to learn that.
So transitioning to online teaching, there's also a MOOC committee at the moment evaluating whether the university is going to move forward with the massive open enrollment online courses through Coursera. We do have access to that. So that's kind of intertwined issues, but some slightly different ones.
well, and assessment is a big issue. I don't think you specifically mentioned
I
that,
didn't
but I
specifically
mean, that's
say that.
a key focus for a lot of departments. You've got to show that you're achieving your outcomes. So how are we going to do assessment? What are some ways to implement these different modes? And,
Oh, you mean teaching assessment, right?
yeah.
Rather than only learning, but effective teaching.
Well, no, either way. I mean, from the standpoint of faculty evaluation, but really I'm thinking in the biology department. I mean, we're being asked to show that the students really learn, that they come out of the class. So it's actually more from the standpoint of the student.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Like for
Program assessment.
program
my
assessment.
Program assessment
Yeah.
and accreditation, things like that.
Yeah, we have to do this SEI, yeah, right? So, the only question that I care about is how much have you learned compared to other courses, And because sometimes it was painful, I understand, but how much have you learned in the process, Of course, we might have ways of easing up, but if you don't like math and you are in a math class, you don't have to, you know. So for me, that's the most important, but that's a very overlooked question. So they want to know, do you like your teacher? That's basically what many times it's got from there. So assessment, yeah.
Okay, well, we have 2 takeaways. This is just a one-page template that goes through the backward design model. It doesn't have a lot of writing space on it, but it gives you a visual to think about going through those stages. So I'll send those around. And then we also have a one-pager about our new unit, the Teaching and Learning Commons. And this is a one-pager under revision because we have a strategic planning retreat next week to try to refine a lot of our documents. But as you're going back into your departments and programs, we want to start to get the message out that we're here to support faculty, and we can work with you in a variety of different ways. And Amy, feel free to chime in, but we can meet with you individually. We can meet with your department if you're thinking about curriculum changes or course changes. We can.
Committees?
Yeah, possibly. That's a potential. We do workshops like this. We could also come into a department and do a workshop if there was interest in something in particular. And so we're just starting up these ideas, initiatives for support. So we're very open to suggestions for both the topics and the format of interactions that you'd like to see.
Well, one of my thoughts is this idea of the resources, and where one of the problems to doing research papers or projects, we mentioned that the students seem to be having weaker writing skills. And so how can we effectively interact? Should we involve some people with English? I know for research papers, the library is very well set up to come into your class, to do a library guide for your specific course, so that I'm not qualified to teach my students how to write, how to probably even do the research, but I can recognize when they've had poor research tools and when they're writing really badly. And so how can we, collectively access some of these other things and guide students? It's also the issue with the math, like the pre-preparation. Where are their remedial things?
So on resources on campus that we can maybe help interface with to work with departments. Okay. So you'll be seeing a follow-up email that has kind of a standard evaluation form from the provost's office where the workshop series comes from. But thanks for being willing to come down to Jackson Kelly today, see our digs here. And please go back and tell colleagues in your department that there's this new unit and we're starting to get the word out, and we'd like to work with you on your teaching.